Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
There's a town in England that had a wisdom that we really could have profited from in the United States. 60 years ago, they saw that they and we were going to go through a severe ecological crisis. And they had a town meeting to see what they could do to ward it off. And right away they saw that the combustion engine was going to be the biggest threat that they had to face. It would pollute their air more than any of the threats to water or land. Instantly they banned it. From that day to this, nothing with a combustion engine has ever been allowed in the town. No car, no cycle, no van, no truck. They had no problems with that. And their rules hold whether you live there or visit there. Their problem was, well, then how were they going to get around and how were they going to carry their things around? And all day they weighed the pros and cons of every single other mode of communication, transportation. At the end of the day, by a very, very close vote, they settled on what for 60 years they've used. They settled on the donkey. And should you ever be privileged to visit there, because of its importance to their life, you'll notice that every single person in town has their own donkey. The most elderly man has his ass. The most elderly lady has her ass. Look at any of the cute young gals, they've got an ass. Young guys got their ass. Now, because it's as important to life for them as it is, people are pushing their ass and pushing their ass and pushing their ass. If you push your ass too hard, it's going to break down on you. Now, you may never have had to stop to figure out what life would be like without your ass. Some troubles start piling up right away. So you borrow somebody else's ass. In your whole life, has anybody else's ass ever moved fast enough for you? So you help it along. And that leads to troubles because people don't like to have their ass kicked by strangers. As important as it is to life, there's a lot of peddling ass goes on in the town. And you know, people pretty much are all the same. And a young gal will park her ass where it doesn't belong. And the local cop has to come along and pinch it. Once a year, everybody parades their ass. And they try to pick the best-looking ass in town. I don't know if you've ever been into asses, but they're not all the same. They come in a wide variety of sizes and shapes and everything else. Asses may differ, politicians don't. You find the local mayor kissing ass for votes. Now, there's a particular Sunday that leads to the story I'm sharing with you. And the Sunday began as every other Sunday, with everybody hauling off their ass and going to church. Right in the middle of the Catholic Mass, an earthquake struck the town. Well, everybody ran out of the church to save their ass, except for the local priest. He had tied his ass to a tree along the side of the church, and all those windows were broken by the earthquake. Well, he thought he'd be smart and just jump through a window and land on his ass. What he didn't know was that was exactly where the main crevice of the earthquake was. And he fell in it by mistake, proving that even a priest can't tell his ass from the hole in the ground. I'm Larry Kowalski. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a Catholic priest who got here because I couldn't tell my ass from a hole in the ground. I hope we started out spiritual enough for you. I'm not dressed like a priest, and nowhere does the title Father appear. There was an early reason in the program for my doing things this way, and it's because I sobered up in a military town where we had a guy who introduced himself as Colonel John till he got drunk and came back as John. And I hope I learned his lesson. But today I've got a much deeper meaning and reason for not dressing in any uniform and not using any title. In my entire life, with one exception, and maybe I'll remember to share it with you, this is the first group of people that I've ever felt accepted me. And I don't want to be accepted for what I do. I want to be accepted for who I am. And so should you meet me and want to arrange a ceremony in the church, I think respect requests that you call me by a title for that. But if you ever deal with me in Alcoholics Anonymous, for my sake, I hope it's Larry, and I hope I can call you Judy, or John or whoever you are, and we can meet on that level. I've often wondered why the hell they ever pick themes for conferences. Nobody ever refers to it. As best I can remember, we haven't even had a sneeze out of any speaker who's referred to the theme. This is going to be very different today because that's exactly what I want to share with you on. Half my sharing is going to be on the common solution. And I want to introduce it by reading what almost from the earliest days in Alcoholics Anonymous has been one of my favorite, if not my favorite, selection of the whole big book. It's near the start of Chapter 2 from There Is a Solution. We're average Americans. I wish you could stand here and look out. All sections of this country, many of its occupations are represented. Some of us are inoccupied also, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. Every so often, I think the book throws in a sentence that is just unbelievably understated, and the next sentence is one of those. We are people who normally would not mix. Could you just picture this room if all of us who were alcoholic were thrown together in it the week or the month of our last drunks? I first heard that shared at a meeting of young peoples in Texas where we had like 100, out of 150 people at the meeting, 100 of them had done hard time. And somebody said, could you just imagine what would be going on? I mean, just picture us, the cons, the fights, the rapes. I'd be over in a corner nearly totally catatonic, pulling into myself in fear, because that's where I was at the end of my drinking. Then the book goes on and says, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding that's indescribably wonderful. We've had some bikers here. I'm a prissy Yankee priest. And my world is almost as foreign from the world of a biker. I've only been on a bike once in my life and burned my thighs. So I've never been back on one because I had better things to do with my thighs in those days. I'm not St. Joseph with a drinking problem, okay? I got to tell you that up front. I sponsor some Native Americans. I sponsor some blacks. I remember one of the greatest moments when I understood what this program was I was at the meeting of young peoples, and a black lesbian and I gave a kiss of love. And it meant so much to me. Because there is an understanding. She understood me the way my mother doesn't. And I understood her. We're like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster doesn't subside as we go our individual ways. There's two terms that I want to build my talk on. The first is going to occur in this next sentence, and the second is your theme. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement that binds us, which binds us together. Common peril. But that in itself would never have held us together as we're now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we've discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly, sisterly, I'll add that, and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. And I certainly hope it's the great news that our sharing together this morning can have. Common peril. If I were to listen to the speakers that have been here today and listen to what I call the accidentals of their drinking, there's so much that they did that I can't identify with that it'd be easy for me to say I'm not an alcoholic. For example,
I was never arrested. Now, it's not because of what I did, because I stowed every cent in the poor fund of the first church I was in, and not for booze or drugs. I did it for sex, to finance some of the things, to handle the same inner pain in here. But I was just never arrested. When I reported it, the church doesn't like arresting its priest. It's bad publicity. So they didn't say much about it when I came in the program and hit my own 8th and 9th steps. The cops were after me in the town I was in the last 2 years of my drinking because of anti-war activities. And I was warned if I ever took a drink not to drive. And I drove drunk and blacked out for like about a year and a half at least. So the fact that I wasn't arrested doesn't depend upon me. But if I listened to Martha being arrested, I could say, well, I'm not an alcoholic because I was never arrested. I did a course in a mental hospital, and I knew that I belonged in there as a patient, not because of alcohol or drinking. But I just never got committed. And I could listen to Cloyd being in one of our free mental hospitals in Oklahoma and figure, well, alcoholism means you got to be in a mental hospital. I'm not an alcoholic. Now let me turn that around in my life. I doubt if maybe there's another person in the room today that ever celebrated. You may have attended religious ceremonies, but I doubt if any of you ever celebrated Mass drunk. I have. And you could listen to that and figure, well, if I haven't celebrated Mass drunk, I'm not an alcoholic. You may have not been in a position where people called you desperate at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I have. And I hung up on them because I needed to drink. And I didn't have time for them. You can listen to that and say you're not an alcoholic. We have the accidentals. They're not part of the common peril. I want to describe for you what listening to a lot of fifth steps and looking at my own life, looking from my own life then, is the common peril that I think most of us in this room who are alcoholics shared. And the very first part of it is so subtle, I missed it for 10 years. It's in the book, but I missed it. And it's that alcohol works. Now, to understand this, I had to listen to a lot of Al-Anons and hear that alcohol did something different for them than it did for me. It worked for them, but it was working in an entirely different area than it was working for me. I have never heard anybody come up with a better description than Clancy has for the difference. And he's been around in a group when I've shared it, so I feel free always stealing it. He says an Al-Anon takes a drink, and it goes down, and it goes plop. It does something. It plops. I take a drink, and it goes down, and it goes So I could be out with an Al-Anon, and she's drinking and flipping, and I'm going in here. We really can't understand each other. It's so different. And what I heard listening to Al-Anons is, I've listened to one who had a bad car accident. And after the accident, she went home and had 2 drinks to help her solve the problems of the accident. I had a bad car accident in my drinking, and I took a drink, and that was the answer. And that's the difference. Other people will use alcohol to handle their problems. I would use alcohol as an excuse to handle problems, but when I drank, that was my answer. And that's a very subtle difference, but it's a very important difference. There's some scientific evidence, and I'm no scientist, it's always been my weakest area, that says that for an alcoholic, alcohol acts strangely on certain of the organs of the body, and it produces an opiate. So she's taking a drink, or he's taking a drink, the Al-Anon, and getting alcohol. I'm taking a drink, you're taking a drink if you're a lady alcoholic, and we're getting like a shot of opium. We're getting a barbiturate, and it is really a different world. Now let me tell you what it did for me. I believe I found a God through the program. So you don't get turned off by being a priest. I hate priests. I wouldn't want my sister to marry one. When I came into the program, I was a practicing atheist, and that made it easier for me to find God. I was a priest already. But I was praying and getting drunk I was stealing all this money. I was breaking every rule. I was doing so many things in the sex area and so many other areas that they don't make you Saint of the Year for. I didn't want there to be a God. No, I didn't believe in one, and if I had a vote, I'd have voted any that did exist out of existence. And I think I found it easier to find God. And right to today, and please, if you have a religious background, I don't want to offend you, but I prefer to sponsor atheists. They're easier to bring to really finding God. Because most religious people I know, in the worst two groups, I can speak for one and I'll talk for the other, unfortunately. I can talk for Catholics and Southern Baptists. We're the worst. The moment anybody with either of our backgrounds starts surrendering to God and finding a God experience, we try to force that God right into the box that some school teacher in a 3rd and 4th grade told us that God was like. And my God don't fit into any boxes. That's the one really thing, the one great surprise I'm finding the longer I stay sober. And atheists are free. They don't know where this God is. And they don't have a religious background, and they can find the God so much faster than people with a religious background really do, because they don't have that freedom to force them into a box. And I didn't do that when I came into the program, so it kind of helped me a lot. But I believe in a God today. And believing in a God, I believe that every single one of us were intended by God. And as total people, when we're born, we're precious children. And God wants that precious child to become a precious person. But I had so many obstacles, so many really things that kept me from becoming precious. I'm going to detail them really fast and show you how alcohol handled each one. I grew up feeling ugly. As a child, my ears stuck out straight, and they were at least twice, well, 2/3, again, larger in size to the proportion of my head than they are now. A cousin of mine who was in 1st grade with me still remembers how the kids would just rag me and call me Big Ears and Dumbo the Elephant. And I felt so ugly. And my brother would do this. I have an older brother who would do it to hurt me, and my mother would use it to hurt me when she would flare up in anger. That I felt scarred inside physically. And 10 years sober, if I closed my eyes, I couldn't picture my face. 35 years old, in the program, if when I shaved, I didn't see what was there, because I blocked it out, because that was ugly. I took a drink, and that was changed. Now, I've heard people talk about how they felt attractive. My feelings were so deep, I never felt attractive. But what I felt was there was like an electric light that went on inside me that was magnetic. And you would see that light, and you wouldn't see the physical ugliness. Now, I'm putting words on it. But I felt ugly, and I took a drink, and I was okay. I also grew up feeling guilt for being, or shame-based, or ACA, or Al-Anon, or codependent, all those terms. The best term I've ever heard goes back to the good old transactional analysis. From the earliest moment of my life, when I climbed inside myself, I just felt not okay. And I looked out at all of you, and you looked okay. And I didn't know what the hell to do. You know, when you feel ugly, how can you grow? When you feel not okay, how can you grow? How can a precious child become precious when the child feels not okay just for being Larry? And so I had to be a perfectionist, because I wasn't okay at all. And if I screwed up at all, there was no room in your world for me. Maybe if I acted perfectly, you would tolerate me. And so I felt guilt for everything I did and anxiety for everything I was going to do. I bought aspirins on top of booze, street drugs, and counter drugs. I bought aspirin by the 1,000 tablet bottle, and I was living with them all the time. I'd had a tension headache all the time, and I was taking Alka-Seltzer and everything else. I lived in constant pain because I just was not good enough, and almost every Al-Anon I know feels that. Half the alcoholics do roughly that I know in the program. The other half don't. But I took a drink, and I was okay. Instantly, I went from being not okay to okay. Somewhere around puberty, I started feeling on top of this that I was crazy. Ugly, guilty, now crazy. One of the most horrendous moments of my life, and I didn't really realize how bad it was till about the last 2 years. I came home one day, my parents had another couple over, they were playing cards, My mother, all my grandparents were born in Europe. My parents didn't have a lot of social background, and they couldn't share a lot with us. They did the best they could, but it wasn't the best for me. And I carry lots of scars for this, but blaming them isn't going to do me any good because I got to live with where I'm at today. But this is one of the scenes that very much affected my life. My mother stopped the card game, took me upstairs, threw back the bed sheets, and I'd had a wet dream the night before. She looked at the spot and she told me that was dirty, ugly, and sinful, and evil. And so I apply that to me. And I'm dirty, ugly, evil, and sinful for what I am, because I am a sexual person. It's part of being Larry. And I still carry a lot of the scars from that. And I started first grade at the age of 5. I graduated from high school at 16 and college at 20. I was a year to a year and a half to 2 years behind most of my friends, and they were going through things, and I would only pretend that I knew what they were talking about. And I didn't know anybody else was doing the things I was doing sexually, so I thought I was crazy. And I really thought at the age of 16 I would end my life permanently committed to a mental hospital. Somewhere around the same time I started getting suicidal thoughts. And nobody that I knew ever talked about having suicidal thoughts as a teenager. I still get them in my sobriety. Because it's the way the twig is bent, the tree grows. I can have a lot of serenity. And I now understand why suicidal thoughts will come easier for me, because I've thrown away just about every other escape. Alcohol and drugs, compulsive overeating. And I'm ridding all these things, so when a heavy crisis comes, I still want to run, and I'll naturally think of suicide. As people say, they'll never lock you up for what you think. They just lock you up for what you do. But I didn't know that then, and I honestly thought I was crazy. I took a drink. And I wasn't crazy anymore. I was brilliant. I was going to see a psychiatrist at the end of my drinking, but I would play psychiatrist for you when I had alcohol in my system, because I honestly felt I could handle your whole life. Now, alcohol drugged me to being ugly, and it drugged me to being guilty, and it drugged me to being crazy. But the last area, it worked 100% on. I grew up 100% alone. Absolutely alone. I didn't fit in my family. There was nobody my age in the neighborhood. My brother got my younger sister as an ally, and being with them was pain. And my choices in the backyard were to be with them in pain or to be alone and be lonely. And it was less painful being alone and lonely. And so I grew up in a world of my imagination. And that's the only area for most of my life that little precious child could grow, just in an imaginary world. I didn't fit. I went to school in a Polish ghetto, and I lived outside that ghetto, and all the other kids spent all their time together. And I just didn't fit. Right down to this day, for whatever strange reason, most of the friends I had never called me. Through junior high and high school, I called my friends 99 times for any one time anybody ever called me. And I'm dying inside here, just screaming, please notice me. Just recently, I had an insight. And it's like, I grew up as an orphan. And I really feel, talking to some of the people I sponsor after I saw this happens to a lot of us, and I didn't understand it. Nobody's ever taught me really in my life how to do anything. In the home, my mother taught us how to do housework, and it had to be perfect to please her, and I never pleased her. So the only standard I learned is if you do anything, it has to be 100% perfect, and the world still isn't going to be pleased with you. In my entire life, nobody's ever taught me how to throw a football, how to dribble a basketball, how to shoot a basketball, how to play volleyball, how to toss a baseball, how to toss a curve. And I'm programmed in here to know if you're going to do it, you've got to do it perfectly. See, I went to Catholic school, and we didn't have organized sports 40-some years ago. I'm 51 years old, so you don't have to try to figure it out. We didn't have organized sports back then. And I didn't know how to do anything, so I didn't do it. And I would go over to the gals, and I'd be so ashamed of looking like a sissy and acting like a sissy. But see, I didn't know how to do what the guys were doing because nobody ever showed me. The only thing I ever learned was how to swim. My dad sent us to the Y, and I could swim fairly well, and I did it. 43 years old, I took some lessons in snow skiing, convinced I could never do anything athletic, and I didn't the first 2 days. The next year I went back. I didn't even learn how to do the wedge the first 2 days of snow skiing. But I persevered, and it was something I could practice at by myself so I wouldn't be laughed at. I could go over to the Bunny Hill, and I stayed there for 3 weekends. I'm a damn good intermediate skier now, and I'm a total ski addict. I just bought 2 sets of skis for $1,000 if I had to pay retail price for them. I try to get a clergy discount on everything. I will use the collar anytime I go to buy a car, go to see a banker, and when it works, I'm going to use it. I mean that too. Anyhow, I can ski well, and I'm enjoying it. And there's one other area that I did well at from about puberty on. I did well in school. Because somehow my mother forced us to study because she quit school in 4th grade, my dad in the 11th grade, and they felt an education was the key to life. And somehow I learned how to study, and I was a B student in junior high, an AB student in high school, and a straight A student through 12 years of college. It was the area where I had it made. But see, I never belonged in anybody else's world. My description of life as this outsider who makes it academically but in no other way is, I'm on an island by myself. And you're out here in different groups, and you're all having picnics. Because when I look at you, and that would be right now, when I look at my insides and your outsides like you look like you got it a lot better together than I do inside right now. And so I don't belong. And you all got your backs to me. You don't hate me. You don't reject me. You just don't have time for me. When I took a drink, 2 magical things happened. Instantly, there's an island from my world to your world, and you all turn around, you open your arms. Now that happened. The only group that I did belong to before AA was the first group I drank with in a bar at the age of 17 in Pennsylvania. I belonged to that group, and I know it. I was not an outsider trying to get in. I was part of that group. And alcohol did that for me. Now, that's crucial to understand, because you hear people who have had long, horrendous drunks, low bottom, and they've forgotten. They'll say alcohol never did any good for them, and that's true for many of their lives. But for many of us, alcohol was the only friend we had, and it was the only solution to the alcoholism we lived with. And I'm not crazy today because alcohol worked in my life. And that's the first part, then, of the common peril. Second thing that happened for me was alcohol got out of control in 2 areas. Almost all AAs I know are aware of the second, or the first. I mean, when I took a drink, I went right on and I got drunk. I don't ever remember putting a drink down and walking away from it. I'm sober 16 years, and I just got to tell you, it still irks the hell out of me to watch an earth drinker drink. Now, when somebody takes 2 sips, puts it here, and walks away, I want to slug him. I mean, I honestly feel that. That's my friend. I mean, that's alienation of affection. Belt that damn thing down. Get that explosion going, kid. Don't toy around with it. I didn't always get drunk, but the reason was never inside me for my first drink. They closed the bar, ran out of money. I made an ass of myself over these people's homes the time before, and that was a good reason early. The outside reason worked. Later in my drinking, none of those outside reasons worked. I blacked out all the time. Blacking out, it was so neat. I think it was Martha was the one who shared this. Blacking out never upset me. It was just so much less guilt to carry. To this day, the people I most resent are those turds that were nice enough to tell me the lousy things I did that I blacked out on. That's guilt I didn't have to carry. Thanks, friend. It's terrible. Most alcoholics understand that. The more important one is, that's the physical compulsion. A lot of people don't understand that we are equally powerless over the first drink. I have no say when I take a drink. But if you read the book the way I do, the book stresses even more. I equally have no say over whether I'm going to take a drink. And that is 16 years sober as I stand before you today, as it was 16, 17 years ago when I was drinking. At certain times, burn into the consciousness of every alcoholic that at certain times he has no mental defense against the first drink. And I think, and I feel free to use the mind God gave me to think about the book. And I think the book uses an unfortunate word. It talks about a mental obsession. And most people I know, I believe, like me, think an obsession is thinking about all the time. Listening to the people I know who have had time in the program and gone out and gotten drunk, every one of them have the exact opposite occur. They got drunk without thinking about alcohol. It just happened. Now, they may have been setting up patterns for it, but they didn't think a drink till they were drinking the drink. They were not obsessed with thinking the way I was obsessed with sex a hell of a lot of my life, I'll tell you. It's a very different kind of thing. I'm going to tell you what the mental obsession means for me, and I learned it from my body talk. If the last month of my drinking you had asked me, Larry, what's more important for you, alcohol or your mother? I'd have thought you were nuts. I'm a mother's boy. Obviously my mother is. But I called her blacked out time after time after time and hurt her bitterly. And I'd find this out the next time I called. The thought of having done that never occurred to me the next time I went out to drink and picked up a glass. I just didn't think about it. If you had asked me what was more important for me, my friends or alcohol, well, I thought friends were very important since I was so lonely. But I was ruining my friends' lives, destroying their parties, upsetting their professional relationships, ending their marriages by things I did drunk. And that never occurred to me the next time I went out and just reached for a bottle. The thought was not there. It's like a mental non-obsession. The exact opposite. What's more important? Your program or your church? I didn't believe in God, but the church was important. Well, they had a kangaroo meeting about 17 years ago to throw me out. And the only reason it didn't work is the pastor that I had made the only mistake he ever made that I knew of. And he said if I went, he went. And he shouldn't have done that. He didn't do anything else to ever get me out of trouble or throw guilt on me. And that's one of the reasons I was able to come into the program when I did. But that kangaroo meeting never occurred to me the next time I had a drink. What's more important? Alcohol or my own self-respect? Well, obviously my self-respect was, but I was losing it all. I blurted out in a blackout something that was told me in the deepest counseling confidence. And doing the same thing for confession was the next step. And the only thing I had when I came into the program, the last thing I had, and this went, was my respect for myself and as a professional. I thought I functioned well, but I didn't. I wasn't functioning at all. I had a 9-month depression. And none of that ever occurred to me when I went to reach for a drink. I lost control. But you know, if that's all that happened, I wouldn't be your speaker today. Because I could live with the loss of control. Most medicines have bad side effects for certain people. I've sponsored someone who had several malignancies, and she went through chemotherapy several times and put on a lot of weight and lost her hair. But she had good quality of life, and she accepted the bad side effects because of the quality of life she was getting. I'd have accepted the blackouts and the little other troubles if all that was happening was that because of the quality of life I was getting. But then I went into the third and the most deadly phase. Now, this phase, maybe not all of you can identify with. If you have been court committed to the program, if you came in under intervention or very young, you may have come in before you reach this phase. But listen to the people who have gone ahead of you, and it's inevitable if you continue drinking. Alcohol stopped working. And that was my real hell. Now again, I'm going to go from my body talk to show you what I mean, because when I first heard people say that, I didn't think that happened to me. I thought they drank a gallon of wine, and I wasn't a wino at all. I talk about don't listen to the accidentals. You got to be very careful what you say behind the podium, because people are going to listen to this. And I've heard people say all alcoholics guard their booze supply. They don't. I never did. I ordered the wine for our church services, and we always had a wine closet with 52 gallons of wine. I never had to worry about my supply. I didn't like wine, but it was always there. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, if everything else ran out, I went down, got the key, and got a jug of wine. I didn't have to worry about the supply. Like Joe Martin, I hid the empties. 2 o'clock in the morning, about every week or two, I would walk out with a big sack full of liquor bottles, and I would dump them in the nuns' dumpster. That's really the truth. I didn't want the garbage man seeing all that crap in our dumpster. I did it every time. Anyway, I started drinking in public. I told you how alcohol made me social. When alcohol stopped working, all of a sudden what started happening is I wasn't drinking in public places. I used to go out to the Purple Bunny Club to counsel people. That's the only reason I did it. During Vietnam, I thought these military who came back with so many problems just would be too uncomfortable. I bought this bullcrap, incidentally. You won't, but I did, till I came into the program. I just felt they'd be too uncomfortable coming into the code atmosphere of a church office. So they'd feel much warmer if we went out to the Purple Bunny Club and screamed their problems at each other over the sets of music. And they bought the drinks, of course. But all of a sudden, I wasn't going to the Purple Bunny Club. I was drinking at home. And then I was drinking on the second floor. And then I was drinking on the second floor alone with the door closed. And I shared this about 3 or 4 years ago. And a gal who had been there just finished the phrase, she said, and the shades down. I wasn't social anymore. And when I was with people drunk, the guilt wasn't gone anymore. I felt guiltier than I did sober. And I was dumping my garbage on people I didn't like. Things I had trouble sharing in the 5th step, I was blabbing, drunk, and blacked out. And people would give me the feedback on this. I felt uglier than ever, guiltier than ever, crazier than ever, and lonelier than ever when I was drunk. Now that's my common peril. Because when I reached that phase, I was powerless. Alcohol was bringing more problems than it was taking away, and I couldn't stop drinking because I was powerless over the first drink in a mental obsession, and I was powerless after that in a physical compulsion. Now let me talk about the common solution. It's important, though, first to say that just taking away the alcohol from the life of an alcoholic doesn't help much at all. Because, see, you would have left me with all those living problems. You would have left me with no answer at all, and I couldn't live with that pain, and I'd be dead today. I'd either be dead or crazy. If all that happened 16 years ago was that alcohol was taken out of my life. You see what had happened, just briefly. Alcohol had enabled that precious child to grow. It enabled me to confront people. It enabled me to get over my anxiety and go study. It enabled me to just become everything I wanted to be. And then when it turned, it's like alcohol had enabled the flower to bud, the bud to flower. Then it turned in and it started crushing that flower. So that at the end of my drinking, as I told you, I was in a 9-month depression, pretty much just staying in my own room. And I was nothing. And that's what happened when I came to the program. And the purpose of the solution for me is to enable me to become, I think, the fullest Larry I can be. To enable this precious child to be today as much the precious adult as my father wanted me to be. And the beginning of that was fellowship. That's how it started for me. It was the great magic. Now, I don't know that 16 years ago anybody looked at me and used the words I'm about to say, but I felt it in my heart. They looked at me, and what I heard in my heart was, we share, and so we care. And for those of you who stood up early in the program, if you get nothing else from us, and don't try to remember our words. You won't. Don't try to remember all the crap, the intellectual stuff I'm going to say. That's not important. I hope what you hear is that I care enough about you and I share enough about you that I'm going into my life and I'm bringing out things that normal people don't talk about and telling them to you so you understand I know your pain and we know your pain. And so someone understands and you're not alone. Now, I came to meetings with instructions that I've never heard anybody else get. I was told to arrive late and leave early. And I'm telling you this because every so often I hear someone chairing a meeting who makes smart remarks about people who do that. And if the chair people at my first meetings had done that, I may not be here today. I might be dead or crazy. You see, I couldn't do what I've seen so many people do. I could not come to a meeting that started at 8 o'clock and be there at 7:30 in my first week of sobriety, because I was dying inside here. And I couldn't look at you and talk at all. I couldn't be in the world. And the only way I could sit at a table of Alcoholics Anonymous was by coming after you had started the meeting so I wouldn't have to talk. And leaving before. But somehow, the real fellowship got across on that. And the fellowship sent me into a cloud 9. And I started coming earlier and leaving later. And within like 3 months, I was coming at 7:30 and staying around till about 11 o'clock. There were a group of us really sharing. And the real great moments of this program still come to me from the fellowship. Because you see, I had loving parents, but I never felt their love. So I never felt love this way, flowing downward. And I never felt love this way. I was isolated. I never had a friend in my life till I came here. I hurt once, and I was in Pennsylvania on a vacation. And I called back to Oklahoma to someone to tell her this. And 3 hours later, I had traveled 100 and some miles from my mom's to my brother's, and the phone rang, and it was my sponsor on the phone. And this friend of mine had called my sponsor and said, Larry's hurting. He made 3 long-distance phone calls to track me down. That's love. There's a single person here today who's the most important person I've had all weekend. Some of you know him. Uncle Bobby from Stockton with 33 years. I had the pleasure of staying at his home 3 or 4 years ago. He heard I was going to be here, and he was going to take the bus just to be here to be with me. You know, this guy has twice the sobriety I has, and he came to be with me. And I really wish I weren't the turd that I am. Last night he asked me if we wanted to have breakfast together, and I get nervous the morning of my talks. You can tell that. And I just shared that I'd rather rest. And he walked away. And the moment he said that, I started figuring, here's a guy with twice my sobriety, bringing me the love I never felt, the time and the comfort I never felt from my father. And I felt so wonderful around him. And he comes and he says, I'd like to have breakfast with you. And I said no. It took me all day yesterday to track him down. We had breakfast this morning. Now that's love. And I hope you feel that. You know, I've come to meetings after I've come into the program, and I've had my arms locked, and I've stood against a wall saying, I bet you none of those damn people are going to talk to me. I'll tell you 2 great moments in AA. They're both symbolized by this. My first young peoples, in Whitney, Texas, I walked outside the room. I had to go to the bathroom. And when I was outside, they ended the meeting, and everybody stood up inside, and they locked arms. And they started doing a kick dance, singing, I've got a never-ending love for you. And I hurt. Because again in my life, the world was having its picnic, and I was outside. But that day, I had been in AA for about 1.5 years, and I knew the great difference. You all wanted me inside, but it was just my fear keeping me outside. I don't know why, but I have never doubted in 16 years that you want me. And I never felt that from anyone else. I haven't always accepted it because I've hurt bad in the fellowship. I just want to share this, please. We are all different. And Ken and Martha have had such wonderful sobrieties. But it says in chapter 5, you know, Ken just says we insist upon joy. And he laughed about the guy with 13 years who says, I'm going to get my cake. I want to say something in defense of that man. Many of us suffer from grave mental and emotional disorders. And I want to hear where that man came from. When I was 4 years sober, I sponsored a man who passed me in Serenity in 6 months. I wanted to trip them just as you went by. Till it occurred to me I wasn't he and he isn't me, and I wasn't competing with him. I've got to grow for myself. And there have been times at this program when I may have stood up, and at 13 years it damn well could have happened, and says, I'm 13 years sober. Now, if it upsets you to hear me share that, that's your problem. You see, I have heard my God speak twice in my life. Once was at this young people's, and what I heard God say was, Larry, I made you, and I'm proud of who you are. And if anybody out there doesn't like it, that's their problem. I want you to have your pride. And if you don't have it, that's your problem. And I got to claim who I am, what I am at any moment. It occurred to me once, grass grows quickly. Trees grow tall. And the people I know, many of them, who are the giants in this program, have a lot of slow, painful growth. So there's something to be said for the 13-year-old guy sober who isn't joyful all the time. You know, he didn't start off feeling not okay for 35 years ever in his life. And it's hard for some of us. And I know I got a twinkle in my eyes today. But I don't always feel it. But I know it's there from what other people have responded. This program has worked wonders and miracles in my life, but they haven't come easily. And so listen to where we come from. And give us time and give us patience to do our own growing. The fellowship took me so far, and then I went into a depression. And the fellowship wasn't enough of an answer for the common solution. There had to be more. And I needed to become spiritually awake. You see, I had come in and I wasn't blossoming. Let me make some more comments on the fellowship. I came in totally crushed as a person. And so many of you feel the same way. And I just want to share this because it might help you. If you're new, we tell you not to get into a lot of relationships because Cloyd quoted a phrase I use, water tends to seek its own level. I'm going to give you two phrases. One is nice and the other is much more vulgar, but I think you might remember it even more. The nice one first. When I feel like a pig, I act like a pig and I run with pigs. When I feel like a man, I act like a person and I run with people. I want men and women in my world. When the program gives me enough dignity that I feel like a prince, I run with royalty and I look for them. And when I really have it together and I feel like a child of God, I know that only children of God are the company that I really need. Now that's the nice way. Let me put it to you the grosser way. It isn't butterflies that are attracted to horse shit, it's horseflies. And it isn't swans that are attracted to dead meat, it's buzzards. So if you're new in the program and you smell like horse shit and look like dead meat, don't think a swan's going to attract herself to you. And I can tell the quality of my sobriety by looking at what's flying around. And when the buzzards start gathering, I know I'm back in a dry trunk. That's honestly the truth. You know, when the swans are out there or the butterflies, it's a lot better. So I came in and you helped me unfold. You got me out of my room and I could be with you. But there's a lot more, Larry, to be developed. And that's where the program comes in. Now, most people talk about the first time they work a step. I'm not going to do that. If the steps are solutions to problems, these problems keep recurring in my life. And I'm going to give you times in my sobriety I had to go back and recapture a step. The single most important thing for me at any moment is to remember in my life, not taking a drink is the first thing. And that's not always easy to remember the longer I'm sober. 2 years ago, I faced the real prospect of having cancer for the first time in my life. I give blood every 2 months. It's an ego trip. I got a rare blood, and I like to hear a moo and all when I walk in. I got a B-negative blood. And I got turned down 2 out of 3 times for having iron-poor blood. And in between, I was eating spinach and taking iron supplements, and I got worried. Now, my doctor's in the program, and honestly, he has less tact than Genghis Khan, and you're going to see that in a moment. I walked up to him after a meeting, worried about getting turned down this second time, and I told him what just happened. And he said, well, I don't trust their tests. But, middle-aged man, iron-poor blood, that means you got internal bleeding. That means you got cancer of the colon. And he walked away. Then he came back and he says, since you're taking those pills, you got to wait a week before we run some blood tests. And he walked away again. I had my funeral planned before I got home that day. Now, I knew, though, that I could not make having cancer more important than having alcoholism. And I'll tell you where I've been blessed doing that. Thinking of 2 people, because I inventory other people all the time. In case you think that we're not supposed to inventory other people, you hear a lot of things that are not true. Please one day read the resentment list in the big book. You cannot do a resentment list without inventorying other people. Here's your proof, so you don't take this from me. Mrs. Brown, Mr. Brown, his attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress. He may get my job at the office. That's even an imaginary inventory of him. Jones Watch this for taking someone's inventory. She's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. But there's a bigger reason for inventorying other people. I only have two ways to learn. By burying you or by burying me. And I would much rather bury you than me. So if I don't want to bury me, I'm going to learn your lesson. And I've done that in this program. I'm also 51 years old, and I got precocious Alzheimer's disease, and I just forgot what the hell I was talking about. So, oh, it happens. It just really happens a lot to me, and I can live with me now. See, I can just feel free. It happens in the middle of a sermon. I don't use notes. I share the way I'm sharing here, except the vocabulary cleans up a little bit. And I told people we got 3 points, and I got to the third one. I thought, for the life of me, I can't think what the third point is, so let's just end the sermon now. But anyway, I've met two people with cancer. One of them was a total loser when he came down with his cancer, and he became one of the 5 greatest people I've met in my life. And he died within like 3 years sober. And what happened was, from the time he got cancer, he started carrying the message to other people. He got out of himself. He remembered his alcoholism. I looked at him in a wheelchair. He had had a colostomy. 2 months before he died, there was a newcomer. And he wouldn't say the first 11 chapters. That was a waste of time. You could pull out to the wives and to the employers and all that. He said the first 7 chapters. And I remember having heard him say this with enough love, how many pages? The first 103 pages of this book, he would look at a newcomer and say, I have the answer to every problem you've got. And that man blossomed, dying. A woman I sponsored, as soon as she came down with cancer the 3rd time, instantly dropped everybody she sponsored, and I watched her just shrivel. 2 people faced the same thing. One became one of the greatest people I've known, and the other just a sad spectacle of anybody. One put the alcoholism first, the other problem first. And I got to remember that today. There is no problem in my life more important than my alcoholism, if I'm going to keep things in a perspective. And that's not always easy to do. Second step for me came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore us to sanity. When I was 12 years sober, I did an inventory, and I discovered I didn't know how to relate with anyone at all. I'd never had any friends. And to me, a relationship was coming here, sitting across the aisle from you, talking to you before a meeting began, going home with a nice warm memory. Or I've had some friends here. I want to put their names on tape even, Judy and John. Have been people who have been so important because we sat together through almost all the talks. And they've been friends, and the smile in their eyes, it just helped me coming in, flying from out of state, not knowing anybody but 4 people when I got here. Bud's been so close. You know, I can fly back to Oklahoma and live with the memory of meeting 2 nice people, and I called that a relationship, and it isn't. But you see, I didn't know how to relate, because nobody had ever taught me how. And I never went through the normal teenage period. And when you're 12 years sober and 47 years old, it's easy to say, I'm never going to learn, and give up. And my second step is a challenge for me to believe today that there's no problem in my life stronger than God's power. And whatever I am, the power of God can enable me to love that. 16 years sober, I had huge sexual hang-ups. And if I don't forget, I'm going to share at the end. I don't want to forget to tell you that I've got 100 days of peace for the first time really in my life. But 16 years sober with a sexual problem that could cost up to $1,000 without batting an eyelash in a day as a priest. Hey, you know, it's easy for me to say this is never going to go. I do my second step by listening to people who have been where I'm at in areas, and I have a friend who has a sex addiction, and he shared with me how he's been running straight, and he's less than half my time sober, but I remember that God's power reaches into this area. I have friends who have been compulsive gamblers, and they've had time straight in the program, and I would listen to God's power in their life. And then I would go to people like Uncle Bobby who just breathed the Serenity, and I would see how much God's power has done in their life. And that's my hope. And when I need it in my sobriety, and the longer I'm sober, the harder it is to do the second step completely, because it doesn't say sobriety. That's where sanity begins. It says sanity for me. I need to believe that whatever problem I got today, it's going to go. And if I just believe that, half the problem's gone already. The third step for me is made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. Now that for me is my sponsor. I've never seen God. God came to me. I met a person who took me to a group, who took me to AA, who took me to the program. And 2 weeks sober, I surrendered to the program, not to God, and I woke up at peace with myself for the first time in my life. And I didn't call that God, the God of the church, because that didn't work. I didn't force him into a box. I let that feeling grow for 2 years. And everything that feeling was doing by coincidence was good for me. So that feeling, that goodness here was personal. And a personal power I call God. Not trying to lay on terms. And I didn't lead that to the church even. 2 years later, I brought the church into the area of this experience. And I found this God of my heart, the loving, forgiving God on every page of the Bible for me. And I really knew that he was always there, but I just never met him. But it happened so slowly. I'm 16 years sober. It's not as easy for me to surrender to what my sponsor tells me today. You know, my head starts going, hell, what does he know? You know, when I sobered up, when I got the present sponsor, I had 3 years. He had 7 years. Wow. Now I've got 16 years. He's got 20 years. So what? A little bit more. But I'll tell you what happened. I was honored once, and a tape club picked a tape of mine for Tape of the Month. I just want to share this because of what I just joined that tape club that month. And I was wishing, because the guy who ran it was a good friend of mine, I was wishing he would send me my tape. Got to use a vulgarity in here, but it's what I was going to tell him because I know him well enough. I was going to send the tape back with a note that says, listening to that son of a bitch is what got me to AA in the first place. I didn't need to hear what he said. And that's true. Listening to my best is what got me here. And my sponsor still can straighten out my life for me. 3 years sober, he walked up to me, he looked at me, he was my sponsor for about 3-4 months, and he says, you dress like a Pittsburgh pimp or a Philadelphia fag. Change. He didn't know how sensitive I was. You know, I wanted to feel a part, and I was dressing to feel different, to look different. He was at a meeting, and I got a ring 10 years sober that someone gave me with a 10-point diamond to celebrate my sobriety, and he heard me apologize for it. And he nailed my ass instantly. He says, don't you ever apologize for making yourself look good. That's the wrapping paper for the package, for the present, for the artwork that God made you. And I hate being dressed up. But I will dress up once a month for AA, because I know this is many of you people, your church. And I dress up so you know that I feel your meeting has the dignity it has for me. And I will make myself look the best. And I don't apologize or excuse it. I want to look it then, as long as I can wear shorts most of the rest of the time. So I do what my sponsor tells me, and I start feeling good. When I dressed a part, I was a part, and I hurt. When I dress part of, I can feel part of, and I can feel a little more fellowship. The fourth step, when I came into the program, I did a resentment list that was 52 pages long, 50 pages handwritten and 2 pages typed. See, I needed to hate you. I needed to resent you because you were going to reject me, and I had to reject you first. 8 or 10 years sober, I did a resentment list that was 12 pages long. And I want to go back to that comment about the guy with 13 years. You know, some of you, if you hear that a guy with 10 years sober has a resentment list 12 pages long, you're going to wash them out. Well, maybe you should, because I have nothing for you, maybe. But you see, I had grown. That resentment list had gone from 52 to 10 to 12 pages. 12 years sober, I did an inventory, and I thought my sponsor was going to throw me out of his home when I went down to share it. And he stopped me halfway through, and he couldn't believe it. He says, Larry, you realize, for the first time ever, you're not blaming anybody for any of your problems? You know what that translates to? I wasn't resenting a person on earth. And I've had 3 years of that, of being nearly 99.6 of resentment-free. People have gone out of their way to screw me in the last 3 years, 2 or 3 of them. And I want to kill them the first day. I want to hate them forever the second day. And by the third day, I don't want that emotional turmoil. I don't give a damn about them. I don't want that drain on me. And I want to get rid of it. And I start trying to get rid of the resentment, doing it the way the big book says, not at the end of the book where it's easy, but in chapter 5 where there's specific step-by-step instructions. From writing to looking to praying to then analyzing for how to get rid of a resentment. And that part works for me. When I came in here, I had the emotional age of a 3-year-old. That's what my first inventory did. If you haven't done your inventory, if you've done your first one, step back a moment and ask the guy you did it with. What age person acts this way? And that's how I found out I was acting like a 3-year-old. And I've watched myself grow in sobriety. And that's why I didn't know how to relate, see. I went through the teen years looking like a teenager, thinking like a teenager, with the body of a teenager, but acting like a 3-year-old. And about 2 years ago, I had reached the point where I'm a young adult. And I want to reach over and I want to touch you. But I didn't know how the hell to do it. Now, I didn't learn how to do it. I didn't have that normal give and take that teenagers do. And I'm not going to get time. There's one part of our common solution I don't think I'm going to get into at all. It's the traditions. The traditions are step-by-step guides for any relationship. For me to look at you and say our common welfare comes first. Not what I want, not what we want. But what does a loving God, in my conscience, honestly tell me is best for us? And there's only one requirement for the friendship, that I want in it, that you want in. And you can apply all the traditions to this, and they're the most perfect guide. For a 51-year-old guy who's 18 years old and doesn't know how the hell to relate, to start learning how to do it. And they're a guide for me. They're a gold mine that we haven't even begun to tap. The fifth step, I never had the freedom to be me, because I was not okay. And I had to hide me behind games and masks. And when I go to one person and share everything that I am, I have the freedom to be me. But once I do this, I want to start hiding myself. 6 months ago, 2 people I sponsor who are friends both called on a Monday night. They both called up and they both said, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "I'm sitting here thinking of killing myself." You don't want to hear that from your sponsor always. But you see, the book says we share what it was like, what happened, and what it is like now. Not what it's been like lately that it's been great. I told them both how I felt, and I felt better the next day than I had ever felt in the program. And that's part one. Part two, they now know that if they get tremendously down feelings like this, the program walks them through it. Because the next week when they called, I was feeling great. I was living at my sponsors, and I had had my sex addiction under compulsion for a while, and it exploded again. And mine's a real addiction. And I didn't want to tell him about it. So for a month, I was spending 4 nights a week at his home. I just hid it, and I felt like hell. And I finally says, "Otto, we got to talk," and I told him about it. Nothing has changed, but I felt okay. There's some interesting prayers in the Big Book. The most surprising prayer is connected with the fifth step. After we go and we share everything we are with another person, we thank God for the privilege of having gotten to know Him better. I just discovered that about 2 years ago, and I want to tell you why, in my understanding, that prayer is perfectly placed. Until I have the freedom to be who I am, looking at myself and presenting it to you, I can't know God. Because you see, as long as I grew up thinking I had to be perfect to be in your world, then the God up there was someone who demanded perfection. But if I could be me, with theft problems and sex problems, and still be sober, and still be at peace, and tell you that I have the freedom to be me fully inside me and to show this to the world, then that says something about the God I've got. I got a very understanding, caring, and accepting God. And the fifth step then for me truly is freedom, when I can practice it. The sixth step is becoming Larry. I like to split myself and tell you how generous I am. I don't want to tell you that I'm still charging things to the church. And that's how I saw it. 2 years ago, I called my sponsor, and I told him I'm still charging things to the church I should. And he stopped me and says, "You mean you're still stealing from the church?" Do you know, and this is why the fifth step's so important to share with others, I honestly never saw those two terms go together. You know, charging from the church charging things you shouldn't is a lot nicer than stealing. But I got to see the English, so I'll tell you, I can be real generous, and I am. I can share anything I've got with someone who needs. I don't want to tell you that I still steal. I can tell you that I can put 30 to 40 hours a week into Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't want to tell you that when I was off into sex fantasies, people I sponsored called up, and I just pretended to listen to them. I wasn't going to get rid of the video on the television to listen to them. I just, and hung up. And so I split myself, and I present the side I like to you and hide what I don't like, until it occurred to me, you don't accept trades. You might think I'm pretty weird, but you're either going to accept me or reject me. And you're the only face of God I've ever seen, and that taught me that's how my God deals with me. He doesn't accept my traits, He accepts Larry. He doesn't deal with things I've done, He deals with me. And the sixth step is my trying to become just Larry and standing as a simple person in the fullness of God's love. Seventh step, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Please listen to this because it might help one of you. In 16 years, everything I have humbly asked God to remove, I still have. I did not say that wrong. Here, part two. In 16 years, everything I have humbly asked my sponsor for help with, while I do what he tells me, one day at a time, is controlled in my life. Because you see, I told you how I found God. I didn't find God. I found a sponsor, group, program, God. It's an easier, softer way for me to kneel down and say, well, God, we did it again. You got to get rid of this sex problem. But the 12 and 12 says every step is designed to bring humility in my life. It's hard for me to call up my sponsor and say, well, Otto, I did it again. But when I do it again and tell him and he tells me what to do, then I know peace. And that's the seventh step for me. If you hurt the way I did, if you couldn't develop yourself the way I couldn't, you can't be aware that other people exist. And that's the eighth step. 1 through 7 put me enough to open up enough to become aware of your feelings. The single worst fault I have is I tend to be efficient. And when I'm efficient, I can walk right over your dying body and not see it there. The worst example I think I can share with you is one Saturday morning I had a whole slew of things to do, a list of about 18 things in my head. I drove way out into the country to see a wonderful woman who was dying. And I'd been visiting her regularly and she was way out of my way. I walked in her home. Her daughter was sitting at the table. I said, how's Mary? And the daughter said she died around midnight. I turned right around and started walking around without saying anything. Got to the door, new efficiency took over, turned around and said, if you'd like me to do the funeral, the wake service has to be Sunday and the funeral Monday, and walked out. Never said a word to the daughter. Because see, the mother had died and I crossed her off the list next, and the daughter wasn't on the list. Now, I can't deal with people that way. Not if I want people in my world. And the eighth step is when I become aware that you have feelings. And you know, behind this podium we have to be aware of that. Around tables, I will hear somebody say, thank God I never, or at least I never. And every time I've heard that, I hurt because either I or a close friend of mine has done what that person has just shared. And if you stand up here and you say, at least I never stole the money from the poor fund, and I'm sitting out there and I did, I've come to AA to feel accepted, and I now feel cheaper. There is nothing I have ever heard said in a fifth step when I hear a person's whole life that I could have shared. If I were you, I wouldn't have done it. I didn't do everything you did, but I broke every rule I had, and I couldn't do everything you did because we walked different streets. But I'm telling you honestly, I cannot say at least I never about anything in my life. And the other thing, I hear people joke about people physically, and it hurts. I can't tell a joke that's based upon any kind of ugliness, and I can't make any comments about that regarding a woman or a man. Because if you grew up feeling as ugly as I did, you'll know that when a joke is told like that, some of us are saying that's me, and we're feeling cheaper and uglier for it. And I don't want you to laugh at the expense of some people who are here. And so I don't talk, if you'll pardon this, about old so-and-so or fat so-and-so or bald so-and-so. Because now that's not what we come for. You can hurt me faster than anyone else, and I can hurt you because you have your defenses down when you gather with me. Because we trust each other. And my 8-step demands that I become aware of that. I went to a meeting, and I'll tell on someone else, and I was feeling real good, and a gal, 12 years sober, walked in, and she says, she had a month less than me. She said, you know, when I got here, I felt real bad because I feel my hair is a mess. I look at Larry, now I feel okay. You know, she made a fool of me, and I was at that meeting feeling good. And the rest of the meeting was cheaper for me because she had caused everybody to laugh at me. Now, if you do it when I do it, that's okay. You know, I'm set for it. But we got to be sensitive to other people's feelings. And I got to be willing when I hurt people to set things right. I'm going to run over 9. And if you'll pardon, skip a walk. I've got one important thing to say on 2. 10 for me is balancing the ledger. I do mine in writing, and I tend to feel I'm not okay, so I got to see how I'm okay. I made the bed in the room this morning. I hate that more than anything in the world. You know why I made the bed? Because the person that it's most important for me to know has dignity is in that room, me. And if I'm in a room that looks like a sty, I'm going to feel like a pig anymore. It takes 20 seconds to make that damn bed. I wish I had rich enough to have a maid go everywhere I go, or a butler to make my bed the moment I get up. I would do it. That'd be the one great luxury. But really, the first thing I do in the morning is I make the bed because I'm going to walk into the damn bedroom. And I deserve a better looking room than that. And I want that body talk to communicate itself to me. Through daily inventories, I became aware that a series of depressions I had weren't depressions, they were midlife crisis. And I'm going to share this very briefly because I've never heard anybody else in the program talk about going through a midlife crisis. As a priest, about 15 years, I was sent to the town I'm in. I'm in a town of 650 people. I deal with an area of about 2,000 square miles and 400 Catholics. That means, if you can translate that, they're not going to, I'm not going to become Pope, okay? I'm not going up. You don't go from Sterling, Oklahoma to the Vatican. So I'm going nowhere in my profession. And I was 40-some years old and going through probably some physical changes. And I felt like a failure and I felt useless. And I'm going to tell you what answered that for me so that when it happens to you, you can walk through it too. It's the 11th and the 12th steps. In the 11th step, I felt God's love. And you can't be a failure when God's in love with you. And in the 12th step, I believe today there's one person here who needs to hear what I'm sharing. That's why I was asked to be here. I can't give everything to everybody. We are too different. And if most of you get something, that's great. But I believe I'm alive because there's one alcoholic on earth who still needs for me to share from my heart to his or her heart. And how can I be useless? You know, if my first sponsor, the only thing he ever did was help me, I sure don't think his life was useless. And I got an interesting thing. If you died right now and you came before you and you judged yourself, how would you rate yourself? Is your life a success or a failure? Mine's a success, because I know a woman who died sober because she came to talk to me. And I was able to be useful in her life. Knowing love is what makes me get teary. Haven't been able to cry. I don't have the gift of tears yet. But it's so important for me. Anyway, the 11th step told me I'm not a failure, and the 11th step told me the 12th step told me I'm not useless. I want to go in the 11th step real briefly and tell you my meditations. I'm going to skip prayer because prayer ain't important for me, except when I'm mad to curse it out at God. So happy to hear Sister B talk about learning how to flip God off and how important it was. Because the most important prayer I've ever said was about 3 years sober. I looked up at heaven and I screamed it with everything I could mean, and I screamed in its real form, screw you. And I meant it. And see, I got the anger out. And then God's peace could come in. And unless the anger was out, the peace couldn't come in. And the whole book of Job, as I see it, says the same thing in nicer words. Get your anger out at God. My God is not truth. God can be truth and God can be love. And the great spiritual people in the world come down on both sides, so you can have a different experience of God. Please don't hear what I say as a critique. I'm telling you what I need. You may like chocolate. I don't like chocolate at all. I haven't had a piece of candy in 20 years, just from lack of interest. My passion is fresh strawberries, and a lot of you don't like them at all. Same thing exists in the world of meditation. My God is love. I don't hear love in my mind. I hear it in my heart. The purpose of my meditation is for me to feel love. I'm going to give you a series of quickly 3. I picture myself as a scared little boy with a thunderstorm outside, running because I'm scared and jumping in the arms of whatever loving authority figure I have, a woman, a man, from my pastor, from my president, my sponsor. For mine now it is my dad, because we've worked this through. And he puts his arms around me, and the storm's still out there, and it's okay and it's not okay, but it really is okay. And that's exactly what happened when I came to you, see, because I was, as I told you, 3 years old, and I was scared as hell of life, and I jumped in your arms and put your arms around me. And I felt okay. And it was the beginning. I went on from that meditation to one that taught me something new about God about 12 years sober. If you had a 2-year-old daughter that you just put to bed, and she was born with a deformed leg, and you had you just stayed by the crib and you had kind of caressed her to bed, what would you have rubbed with the greatest tenderness and cried over with the deepest tears? Her defect. Because you'd see how kids were going to laugh at her and mock her, and how she couldn't run freely with other kids. Well, I think from that meditation, I know that's exactly what my father did with me. You see, I have a lot of defects I've been born with that have kept me from running with his other children. And people have laughed at me for him. And all these times I thought he hated me for him. He hated the defects, and I found out that day, for 48, 49 years, that's what he was rubbing with the greatest tenderness and loving. And I just feel that. That's all the meditation is staying with the love. The meditation I'm enjoying the most, and I had a wonderful time with it this morning. I just picture me, and I'll use the word. If you offends you, I'm not using it this way. Me and Jesus in a restaurant. I just got to call him what I call him now. The 2 of us sitting at a table, and all he does is look at me with love. That's all. But once he reached over and touched my arm, and I felt so great. And I've done more. He did what is not just love. Once he had faith in me. And that upset me. I could take God loving me more than I could take God having infinite faith in me. But you see, that just means that he has total faith that Larry can be Larry. And he has total trust that Larry will be Larry because his love's in here. And the confidence just astounds me. And I just stay in those feelings, and that's my meditation. Now that plugs the hole. 1 through 10 don't help me blossom. They remove the obstacles, but they don't help that flower come out. It's that love that really helps me be Larry. I didn't know I liked myself till someone I sponsored said, when you say your name, she listened to some talks I'd given, it sounds like you're singing it. And see, all the time I thought I hated my name. And at this point, I usually forget it. I want to tell you how the flower has blossomed. 10 years sober, I was in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And a meeting had ended, and we all held hands, and someone sang the Lord's Prayer, and I pictured my face all through it. I'd never done it in my life. You had loved me enough so that it went from spiritual to emotional to physical, and I could accept my looks. That was so neat, I didn't even try to do it for a year and a half. And I was amazed when I could do it the second time, and then the third time. And this just became crazy. About 5 months ago, I was at a conference in Irving, Texas, and I was lined up with a mirror in the front row. And one of my favorite AA speakers, Tom Ivester, was talking. I love the man. But I was sitting there, and I was flirting with myself. I actually went to the point where I thought I looked cute. Angie says there's no way from where I started to here except through God, and there isn't, through the love you gave me. Told you about feeling not okay. 3 years sober. Now, some things come easy, some don't. A nun told me to start hugging myself. 4 years sober, and took a whole year, because when I embraced myself, I felt like crap. But now I like to hug myself, and it's tenderly. It's Larry hugging Larry, and it's Larry hugging Larry for God, and it feels good. I don't feel crazy anymore. I'm not the smartest person. I'm not the most brilliant. But I can think, and my life has some sanity to it. As I shared with you, with people like Bobby and Buddy coming to be with me, I don't feel alone anymore. I don't feel on an island. I'm part of a group. Now that's how the flower has blossomed. But you see, there's still more for it than that. And I can't leave you with this, and my entire talk would have helped kill you. The most important part of the common solution I haven't mentioned yet. And I know you've listened long, so please bear with me. What is the answer of Alcoholics Anonymous to the disease of alcoholism? I'm going to give you my opinion on this, but it's very, very strong. It is not God, and it is not fellowship. I believe Dr. Bob had both of those in the Akron movement, and he went right on getting drunk. I listened to a tape of Dr. Bob, and it's what clued me to this. And it occurred to me for how different Bob and Bill were, they only had one thing in common. Each of them, from the day they got sober, never stopped working with other alcoholics. And aware of that, I went back and I read the big book from cover to cover, and it's astounding. What we offered the world 53 years ago is not the big book. It can't be, because the big book didn't exist for 2 years. It isn't the steps. It didn't exist for 2 years. And I have seen people who have no God experience stay sober, and I've seen people with no serenity stay sober. But I've never seen anybody have long-term sobriety who has stopped working with other people. An alcoholic stays sober by working with another alcoholic. And that's very, very important. There's a brilliant clue to this. I'm going to use the book again if you don't mind. If you do mind, I'm going to do it anyway. It's just be your problem. Go to the doctor's opinion. There's 2 wonderful little letters there. The first is real short. It must have been written almost immediately. It wasn't what they wanted, so they asked him for another one, I guess. This is my reading. But in the course of his 3rd treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. Listen to what Silkworth summarizes as our answer right in those earliest days. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conception to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. The second letter says this, talking about Bill. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients. Go into a room like this. How many of us would consider it a privilege to be allowed to go to the closest mental hospital and work with other alcoholics? Why don't we? Because AA is everywhere and sober alcoholics seem normal. And we can look at each other and say, well, of course I'm sober, rather than, my God, I'm sober. Translate this a moment, because this occurred to me, and it should help some of us shock ourselves back to where we were. Supposing every one of us in this room had active AIDS today, and we learned that all we had to do was find the closest hospital with an AIDS patient, go in there and tell him that God was helping us, or spend time with him, and not only would we not die with AIDS, we'd be healthier than we've been for 30 years. We'd consider it one damn big privilege to go into that ward. We've got a disease that 54 years ago the world looked on as... I'm getting angry. Looked on... That's not good. I don't want to project anger. Looked on every bit as helpless as it does AIDS today. But it's so easy to say, of course I'm sober. Now, my being here isn't what's going to keep me sober. This is easy. I can come here and bullshit all of you. Tomorrow night I'm going to gather with 8 alcoholics in Cyril, Oklahoma, and maybe 3 or 4 others. The same 5 of us have gathered in that rural town, same 8 of us, for 5 years. I can't bullcrap them. They know me. I got to share where I'm at. And that's what starts keeping me sober. I've gone through phases of carrying the message. My first 3 years I worked with dry drunks and nobody came into the program. Through my next, from the 3rd year through about the 10th year, because I was a clergyman in the program, I heard 5th steps, and a lot of people did it. Then I became real sick, and I started analyzing rather than accepting. And all of a sudden, God shriveled up the 5th steps, and instantly, at the same time, I'd never done a lot of sponsoring. I started sponsoring. I sponsor about 15 people now. They all call me at least once a week at a set time. I make 4 meetings of my own. I call my own sponsor once a day. I write a daily 5th step, and I try to meditate every day. That's my program. I still work with other people. Bobby told me that I got everything I need out of this conference when I talked to Bobby before it began. Bobby's wife, Belle, has been so strong in Al-Anon, and she went through some severe illnesses recently. Bobby himself has walked through cancer and therapy for it. And he was telling me this before we began, how through the last 3 years he's had times when he was tremendously down. And he said, I didn't know what to do, so I'd go driving around and find a wino, and I would 12-step him and always drive away feeling better. That's the last part of our common solution. And my prayer is that you won't forget it. Lastly, now, I'm at the point of opening up. And I want to share this because we have a lot of different views in the program. I want to become the fullest Larry I can be. I have a solid program that I work with a sponsor, and I have plugged into this sponsor. But a lot of us have contempt prior to investigation in other areas. As the Catholic priest in Sterling, Oklahoma, a rural town where the Baptists are by far the largest, I went to the Baptist revival 4 months ago. And at that revival, I figure it can't do me any hurt. I'm going to go. I'm going to look. I'm not going to have contempt prior to investigation. If the guy's a weirdo, I walk out or don't go back. God offered me the answer to my sexual peace. And I knew enough from AA that I had to take an action to claim it, which for me translated going up to an altar call. I hate altar calls. We don't have them in the Catholic Church. I think they're weird. And I kept waiting for somebody else to go up, and the guy was not a good evangelist. He wasn't very emotional. Nobody went up. I had to be the first person going getting up. I have had 100 days. No, on the 5th I'll have 100 days, and that may be the day of absolute total sexual peace. I got what I need, because I didn't have contempt prior to investigation. I'm a compulsive overeater. 13 years ago, I looked at the program of Overeaters Anonymous, and I applied that program to my life. I'm not ashamed to look at what other programs have. I go to one NA meeting a week because drugs were my backup. My drug of choice is alcohol. But I could rationalize myself into popping a pill. And I go there to remind myself that it's the back door to my drug of choice. And I'll be wiped out. And I don't have contempt prior to investigation. And I'll tell you something. If one of your kids dies of drug overdose, I'm not going to carry any guilt because I've done all I can to support NA. In so many areas, we're walking with drug problems, and I'm not going to get controversial. One of the reasons that we don't like the dual addicts and even the drug addicts to come to AA, well, we don't want them there. Well, one reason they come here is because we're not supporting at all NA. And if we would like AA to be more alcoholic, then we ought to get our butts to NA and help it get healthy. And I've been doing that for 13 years. I started the longest continuing in existence NA meeting in the state of Oklahoma. And I feel real neat about that. I don't have contempt prior to investigation. 3 months ago, I fell apart as a person. I had asked the bishop for permission to leave Oklahoma. For 10 years I was bitching at him, and he finally said, go. And I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. And I realized this isn't normal help, so I started seeing a therapist. Now, my sponsor has approved it. Anything she says has bounced off my sponsor, and I have my whole program. I'm going with the same attitude. If she says something that's going to hurt me, I'm going to leave. But I'm not going to have contempt prior to investigation. You see, I want to look at anything and everything in the world. The answer to my next sex problem, I don't mean in the sex area, but somewhere else, God might have bouncing off something else. I'm going to stay open. Plugged into AA. See, I don't want to spend my whole life in the hospital recovering from my disease. I want to go for my chemotherapy. I want to go for my renal dialysis and then get the hell out into the world to enjoy the world that my God has given me. And that's where I'm at today. I asked my sponsor for permission to share that, since it is a radically different area. Some of us are old enough, this is my wind-up, to remember Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Ties together everything I've been talking about. Jonathan, after learning how high he can soar, comes black, and he's banned by the flock because he has different ideas. And they draw a line, and they say anybody who crosses over that line to be with, they tell all the flock has to move on the other side, and Jonathan's by himself. And all of a sudden, nobody goes over except finally, one of the seagulls with a broken wing crosses over. And Jonathan says, "What do you want?" And he says, "I want to fly." And Jonathan looked at him and he says, "You can fly as high as you want to." And he said, "You mean I can fly?" And the guy says, "You can fly as high as you want to." 14 years ago, I heard a biker read that with tears in his eyes at a Young People's in Texas. It's becoming so much more meaningful to me. You see, that's the story of my life and your life. I had a broken wing. I couldn't fly. I couldn't walk. I couldn't crawl. And I came to you, and you looked at me, and you told me I can fly. Not only can I walk, I can fly. And what are the limits to how much this precious child can be? You can fly as high as you want to. Thank you very much.